right now, as you're watching this program, suppose you suddenly heard the wail of the alert. Would you know what to do? First, keep calm. Panic simply wastes valuable time. Gather all canned goods, blankets, and extra clothing. Don't forget a flashlight, a can opener, portable radio, and extra batteries. Fill all available bottles with water. Take everything to the shelter. If no shelter is available, go to a basement corner without windows. Stay inside your shelter until you're told it's safe to leave. You could have made things easier for yourself by preparing all these things before the emergency occurred.
You and I are living in the atomic age. The peaceful atom, no longer just a laboratory dream, is here today, working wonders, providing a happier, more abundant world for all mankind. Already, atomic development is a major factor in the American economy. Thousands of men and women earn their livelihood by harnessing nuclear energy for our benefit. The Chamber of Commerce of the United States is going to introduce you to just a few of these atomic wonders, miracles that are happening all about you, wherever you are, because the atom has come to town.
Yes, the atom is on its way to brighten our towns and to help manufacture our most dependable and indispensable household servant, electric power. Electricity that illuminates our lives, frees us from drudgery, and brings us in contact with all the world through radio, telephone, and television can now be produced from the energy within the atom. And to some of us, at least, this is surprising news.
You know, I don't know what I'd do without my new kitchen. Really, it saves me hours of work every day. But do you suppose that our appliances would run as well on atomic energy?
Hey, Sam, you know that someday this machine of yours is going to be operating on atomic power?
Yeah? Well, they can run it on kerosene if they want to, just as long as I'm still at the switch. But from what I hear, it'll be quite a while before these atomic power plants even get built.
I declare, with all these atomic plants going up everywhere, I wonder if a girl's even safe in her own home. I just hope they know what they're doing. Who's lead?
I see by the morning paper we're getting an atom power plant here. I remember when this town got its first electric generating station. I was only a boy. Tom Edison himself came down for the ceremonies, checkmate.
The old gent's right about one thing. This town has sure grown up since he was a kid. I don't understand. Why do we need an atomic power plant? Unless maybe it's to make free electricity. Yeah, I suppose that's the reason.
Well, no, that's not exactly the reason. But never mind. A lot of other folks are just as confused about the real purpose of atomic energy. And it all begins with a particle of matter so small that it can't be seen under even the strongest microscope. The end of that billiard cue, for instance, could comfortably accommodate more than 1,000 billion atoms. But, infinitesimal as it is, scientists know pretty well just how the atom is constructed. Let's imagine these pool balls are the nucleus of an atom. There would be protons like the red balls and neutrons like the yellow ones, all bound together by powerful forces. If our atom is split or fissioned, some of the energy is released. A few of the neutrons go flying off and can be made to split other atoms, which release their energy in a chain reaction. Tremendous heat is generated, and it is this heat that can be harnessed for our use. Every element in the world is made of atoms, but only the atoms of a very few elements can be split in this way. The most important are uranium atoms. Potential energy in just 1 tablespoon of uranium equals the muscle power of 40 million strong men working for an hour, or the heat from more than 750 tons of coal. In fact, 1 tablespoon of uranium is potentially capable of making enough electricity to meet all the needs of an average-sized city for a full day, or your own home for about 500 years. But this is potential atomic energy. In actual practice, only a small amount of the uranium fuel can be burned or fissioned. The trick is to make electric power economically from this usable portion of the fuel. Atomic engineers begin with the simple energy conversion principle by which most of our country's electricity is already being produced. Fire can be used to make steam, and steam can be used to turn a pinwheel. If the spinning pinwheel is attached to a magnet, the invisible lines of magnetic force can be made to cut across the turns of wire in a coil, generating electricity. In today's modern electric power plants, this is exactly what happens. Coal, oil, or gas is burned in huge boilers which produce steam at tremendously high temperatures and pressures. The steam spins a large turbine, which drives a giant generator to create the electricity we use. In an atomic power plant, a reactor is substituted for the boiler. The reactor is a special chamber in which atoms of uranium fuel are split, releasing their pent-up energy in the form of heat. Of course, safety devices are added, including dense radiation shielding and special enclosures such as a steel spear. Otherwise, an atomic power plant is just about the same as any other power plant. It will produce the same kind of electricity and run the same kind of appliances and machines as we are using now. Over the years, our consumption of electricity has increased enormously. 10 years ago, the average use in an American family was about 1,500 kilowatt hours of power a year. Now, with so many more household chores being done electrically, about 3,000 kilowatt hours are needed. And 10 years from now, the average American family may be using twice this amount. The same thing has been happening in our factories. In 10 years, twice as much electricity will be needed to maintain our increasing rate of productivity. Already, the United States, with but 6% of the world's population, uses over 40% of the world's electric power. It's one reason why we enjoy the highest living standard of any nation in the world. In the years ahead, our electric power consumption will continue to increase. More for our homes and more for our factories will bring the nation's total demand to at least 4 times the present level by 1975. Right now, most electric power is made by burning coal, oil, or gas. But although supplies of these fuels are adequate to meet demands for years to come, they are not inexhaustible. Besides, these conventional fuels are needed for many other important purposes in addition to the generation of electricity. As our power requirements increase, a new energy resource, atomic energy, will be needed to supplement our present fuel reserves. Fortunately, known uranium deposits exceed by at least 20 times the combined power-producing potential of all the world's coal, oil, and gas resources. Thus, the real purpose of atomic power development is to assure a continuing abundance of electricity. And already progress is being made. This atomic power plant, built for the Army, is generating small amounts of electricity at an important base in Virginia. Originally developed for use by the armed forces in overseas locations, this type of station may eventually prove useful in remote areas of this country. Near Los Angeles is another of America's early reactor projects, built as part of the government's nuclear power development program. A California electric utility has installed a power plant to provide electricity from the reactor heat on an experimental basis. Near Pleasanton, California, is the nation's first nuclear power plant built entirely with free enterprise funds. As with every atomic plant, special attention has been given to safety. Automatic control equipment would shut down the plant instantaneously if, for any reason, fission began to take place too rapidly. A thick steel and concrete vessel would contain radiation even in the most serious kind of accident imaginable. Atomic power plants will be good neighbors wherever they are built. This is Shippingport, Pennsylvania, site of America's first full-scale atomic power station. When completed, it will be the largest known atomic plant in the world, devoted exclusively to peaceful purposes. But it won't make free electricity. No atomic plant ever will. Shippingport's complex nuclear apparatus and tons of concrete and steel add up to a multi-million-dollar investment, jointly shared by government and business. On the quiet banks of the Ohio River, genuine evidence of our nation's atomic progress. But for the present, at least, this progress must be measured more by the nuclear knowledge we gain than by the actual power we generate. Electric utility executives must choose from hundreds of different designs, all of which are theoretically possible. The most promising must first be tried out in small-scale reactor experiments, then incorporated in actual power plants before their commercial value can be established. It's expensive research, but important plans are underway. This is a model of a 275,000 kilowatt station which will go into operation outside of New York City sometime in 1960. This plant, now under construction near Detroit, will have a different type of reactor, capable of actually manufacturing more atomic fuel than it burns. By 1960, power from this atomic station will be furnished to 500,000 homes in the Chicago area. And in the hills of New England, work is already underway on this modern nuclear project. During the next 10 years, atomic plants will be springing up throughout the nation as America's electrical industry, working in the free enterprise tradition, invests hundreds of millions of dollars in nuclear development. And by 1975, the atom may provide a substantial portion of our total generating capacity. The world will have a brand new energy resource, one that will be vitally needed to assure an abundance of economical electricity for light, for power, and for our continuing high standard of living.
You're watching Sleepcore. Pleasant dreams.
This is a radiological defense operations room, a nerve center for survival, which we hope we will never have to use. But since war could come, this room is ready, and so are others throughout the country.
Great Louisville, 740 Zebra, thanks.
5 megaton producer. The USA, almost 3.5 million square miles. And at the other end of our scale of size, tiny dust-like particles. They too have a name. And the name is fallout, radioactive fallout. A large-scale nuclear attack on the United States could produce a patchwork pattern of fallout covering 2/3 of the nation, more than 2 million square miles in a single day. In this 2 million square miles, more than 100 million people living well beyond the destructive range of blast and heat could be subjected to dangerous or deadly amounts of radiation from fallout. Carried upward 15 miles or more by the mushroom cloud, spread laterally by shifting winds at all altitudes, fallout from a single thermonuclear blast could severely contaminate a 60-mile strip downwind from ground zero, 1,200 square miles within an hour of explosion, 4,000 square miles in 6 hours. All of us, even in small towns and on farms, live within fallout range of a likely target. Furthermore, since these targets are often only a few hundred miles apart, fallout patterns can overlap, intensifying the danger. How do we know all this? From practical experience. A thermonuclear test in the Pacific in 1954 produced a highly contaminated area 20 miles upwind and 220 miles downwind, with a variable width up to 40 miles, large enough to reach from Washington, D.C. to New York City, along the densely populated eastern seaboard. In this 7,000 square mile area, there would be enough radioactivity to threaten seriously the lives of all who failed to take shelter before fallout arrived. Let's look at it in another way. Let's assume that industrial St. Louis were hit by a weapon with the explosive equivalent of millions of tons of TNT. Depending on winds, fallout could extend 40 miles into southwest Illinois in an hour, to Terre Haute, Indiana, 150 miles to the east, in 7 hours, and to Wheeling, West Virginia, another 325 miles within 24 hours. Total drift, more than 500 miles. Civil defense tests have brought the problem into sharp focus. In one exercise, an imaginary force of 500 bombers severely damaged this country's key industries. Yet, effects from fallout posed a more serious threat to the nation's survival than did the devastating but more localized effects of blast and heat. Let's examine some of the problems. Although most sources of water are located well outside of big cities, the wide drift of fallout could cause serious contamination of our surface water supplies. Fallout from a nuclear attack could gravely affect the nation's agriculture. Food supplies in fields or in open storage could become dangerously contaminated. Possibly they could be recovered for later use. But what about future harvests? They too could be dangerous if grown in seriously contaminated soil. Cattle, horses, and sheep might have to be kept out of pastures for a long time. In short, fallout from nuclear attack would threaten us with thirst and famine, as well as with sickness and death from direct radiation. That is why our survival as a nation can depend on how well we prepare to defend ourselves against radioactive fallout. And there is a defense against fallout. Before we examine our radiological defense programs, let's take a look at the basis of the problem. As every youngster learns today, there is nothing new or mysterious about radiation. A Roentgen, which we call an R, is a standard unit for measuring radiation. In an average lifetime, a human being is exposed to perhaps a dozen Roentgens. This exposure comes from natural radioactive elements in the earth and cosmic rays from outer space. The human body withstands continued exposure to small radiation doses. It is when the rate of delivery is high, or the total dose in a short period is large, that recovery cannot keep pace with damage. Exposure of the whole body in a short time to 600 or more Roentgens of radiation will almost certainly be fatal. People receiving 200 Roentgens or more in a short period of time will get radiation sickness. Those receiving 600 or more in a short period of time will die. For your protection, shelter is the answer, since highly dangerous doses can be produced by fallout radiation. This is what happens.
3, 2, 1. Fire!
About 85% of a nuclear weapon's energy results in light, heat, and blast. But 15% of the released energy is radiation. This is of two types. The first, initial radiation, is emitted from the fireball shortly after detonation. Since for large weapons it generally does not spread beyond the blast area, initial radiation is of minor concern in the overall problem of radiological defense. It is the second type, residual radiation, that creates the fallout problem. Its production can be described simply. When countless billions of atoms in a large megaton weapon are blasted apart, hundreds of pounds of highly radioactive material are produced. When such a bomb bursts at or near the ground, tens of thousands of tons of earth and debris are carried as high as 15 miles in the mushroom cloud. This tremendous cloud becomes a floating carrier, which drops tiny radioactive particles back to Earth. Where these particles land depends on a combination of three factors. One, their shape and size. Even the largest may be no bigger than a single grain of sand. Two, the height to which the radioactive cloud rises. And three, the direction and speed of winds at various altitudes. Fallout deposit resulting from the combined effects of these conditions is generally divided into three categories: close in, intermediate, and delayed. Close-in fallout usually settles within a few hundred miles of the burst and reaches the ground within 10 to 20 hours. It is made up of the heavier particles in the cloud. Intermediate fallout descends within a few weeks of the detonation. Since the particles are small, they remain in the air for weeks, covering many thousands of square miles. Sometimes they are driven to Earth by rain or snow. Delayed fallout is composed of very small particles that may drift completely around the Earth several times and may not descend for months or years. Radiological defense personnel, RADEF personnel for short, are primarily concerned with close-in fallout.
As you can see, close-in fallout is our real problem in radiological defense. And the problem becomes even more complicated because the speed, range, and direction of fallout depend upon ever-changing wind and weather conditions. Large particles fall fast and land relatively near ground zero. Smaller particles fall slowly, land further away. Winds, which vary at all altitudes and seasons, affect the pattern of these deposits. With winds variable at different altitudes, the spread of fallout will result from the effects of all winds acting upon it. For this reason, radiological defense officers cannot use surface wind direction alone as a basis for forecasting fallout. Radioactive materials decay with time. You might say they cool down. After all fallout is down and radiation has been measured, knowledge of decay rates permit estimates of how hot it will be days and weeks later. With this information, civil defense can estimate when it will be safe to evacuate or to leave shelter. Remember this rule of thumb. There is a 10-fold decrease in radiation rate for every 7-fold increase in time after detonation. For example, a level of 1,000 R per hour at 1 hour after the explosion would be reduced to 100 R per hour 7 hours following the explosion. At 7 times 7 hours, or in 2 days, the level would be down to 10 R per hour. At 7 times 49 hours, or at the end of 2 weeks, the level would be reduced to only 1 R per hour. But remember, until decay reduces radiation to tolerable levels, there are only 2 safeguards against it: distance, that is evacuation to safe areas, or mass, which is shelter. Underground shelters covered by at least 3 feet of earth, or basement shelters of the types recommended by civil defense, will give substantial protection. This is why we believe that most people who live beyond the areas destroyed by blast and heat can survive fallout if they will follow civil defense instructions.
You're watching Sleepcore, media for insomnia.
youngster working on the nuclear power station is my friend Larry. He wants to be a scientist someday. I'm Dr. Woodley. I'm a scientist. I like Larry and answer his questions about atomic energy. I teach youngsters on scientific subjects. I was writing a book on atoms and the particles of matter the last time I spoke to Larry. Now Larry was visiting a science book on controlling the atom. Well, Larry, what do you remember from our talk the other day?
I know that everything around us that we see and touch is made up of billions of tiny invisible particles called atoms. Atoms are so small that lined up end to end would only inch, and the atom is made up of still smaller parts. There are neutrons and protons in a nucleus, and electrons which whirl around the nucleus in various orbits. But each atom is mostly empty space.
Very good, Larry.
I want to know about your new book, Dr. Woodley. What are radioactive atoms?
Well, scientists once believed that atoms of elements never change. Later, they discovered they were mistaken. We know that certain elements do change. They are naturally radioactive. This means that they give off a stream of energy in the form of powerful rays or particles shot out like bullets at tremendous speed. Radium is one element that is naturally radioactive. Radioactive atoms eventually lose their power, change into different elements during a period ranging from a fraction of a second to 10 billion years, depending on the element.
Can scientists measure this radioactivity?
Yes, Larry, they can. Let me show you with my watch. Scientists use Geiger counters to detect radiation. The Geiger counter measures the number of particles given off by the radium on the face of the watch. You can't smell them, taste them, or actually see them, but you can hear their effect. Working with strongly radioactive materials can be dangerous. It requires very special arrangements. This is a glove box. Here, scientists are protected by thick windows and walls. Machines using radioactive materials are heavily shielded with lead and concrete. In addition to radium, there are other naturally radioactive elements such as uranium. Uranium is the most complex atom found in nature. The most common type of uranium is uranium-238 with 92 electrons, 92 protons, and 146 neutrons. Scientists experimented to learn what would happen if they fired a neutron bullet at the nucleus of the uranium atom. What they discovered helped them develop a method of freeing and controlling some of the tremendous energy locked in the atomic nucleus. This power, atomic energy, has many uses to make a better world for all mankind. Think of it, Larry. The energy packed in a piece of uranium the size of this marble could drive hundreds of locomotives traveling at more than a mile a minute for more than an hour. Scientists release some of this energy through a process called nuclear fission. When a high-speed neutron strikes a uranium nucleus, the nucleus splits apart violently. A tremendous amount of energy is released in the form of heat and radiation. Extra neutrons are given off, and they serve as bullets which in turn strike other nuclei and split them too. The process is repeated. In a fraction of a second, billions of atoms are split in an explosive chain reaction, releasing enormous energy. An atomic bomb burst is a chain reaction out of control, creating millions of degrees of heat in only 10/millionth of a second. But a chain reaction can be controlled.
Suppose you don't have a fallout shelter, and you have several hours warning after the attack, but before the radioactive fallout reaches your area. What can you do? You head for a corner of your basement, away from doors and windows. Sandbags or concrete blocks, even bales of hay or fertilizer will give you some protection. Remember, the important point about radioactive fallout is shielding. More shielding between you and the radiation, more protection. There are many things you can improvise if you have the time. But how much better to be safe? Develop a shelter project in advance.